So for transactional analysis, if you haven't taken the test, um, stop the recording, those of you watching this, and come back, ask me, email me, and I'll make sure you get the link. You really should take the test. For those of you who have printed out but haven't taken it yet, just be careful that you don't allow what you learn here during this training session to skew your answers, because when we go through this test, what it's trying to do is score whether your natural style is to be critical parent, nurturing parent, logical adult, rebellious child, natural child, or adaptive child. So when you go to take this test, if you haven't already scored it, just try not to be skewed too much by what you've learned here today. So what we're going to do is go through what's called transactional analysis. Actually, it was created by Dr. Eric Berne for over 4 decades now. What his theories involved have really become the backbone for modern psychology and counseling sessions. And a little bit of background as far as where it came from. Dr. Berne was a modern psychologist, based a lot of his information on things from Freud and from Carl Jung, but he was teaching in the early 60s. He was teaching some lawyers how to pick juries based on human behavior. And as he was doing this, excuse me, one of the students that was in his class all of a sudden started laughing in the back room. And Dr. Berne stopped and he goes, I'm sorry, just something wrong? He goes, no, I just something you said struck me funny. And the little kid in me just came out. And he started thinking about that. Dr. Berne started thinking about how many times has that happened, that maybe you're in church, you're in a setting, and all of a sudden somebody says something that the little kid in you just came out. You just took it as funny. You couldn't stop giggling or whatever. So from that, he started going about looking at transactional analysis and thinking about what really it is. So that's how it developed as far as what transactional analysis is. It's different ego states. So let me give you a couple of stories that kind of helps drive it home. So think about it this way. You're getting on board a plane and you're going on a trip to Canada, and you have some concerns about flying, but you've memorized statistics that basically the worst part of the trip was statistically the drive to the airport is more dangerous than the airplane itself. But now you feel a little bit better. You believe in the numbers. How do you feel? And most people say, well, okay, I feel a little bit neutral, maybe that way. But after takeoff, the pilot's voice comes over the speaker and says that the oxygen mask must be used because of a problem. He says they will drop from the overhead compartment. Now, how do you feel? So you've gone from being neutral to, oh my God, now a little anxiety coming in. But what do you say to that little girl who's 8 years old traveling with you for the first time on an airplane by herself? We'll say things like, don't worry, honey. I'm sure it'll be okay. This happens all the time. But the masks don't descend. The pilot's recorded message repeats again and again. Now, how do you feel? Now we've gone from neutral to a little of anxiety to a little bit even more anxiety. But what do we still say to that little girl? Don't worry, honey. I'm sure it'll be okay. See, we're in a different ego state at that time. Finally, the pilot's wife comes over again and tells everyone that all's well and there's no problem. Matter of fact, there never was any need for the oxygen. Rather, there was a problem with the audio system was malfunctioning. The tape wasn't working correctly. There's no need to panic. The flight attendants were going to walk through the plane and assure everyone that there's no problem. Now, how do you feel? Relieved, but maybe even a little upset, because what do you say to that girl? See, honey, I told you all's going to be okay. But what do you say to the flight attendant? Some people I might say, man, I better get at least a free drink out of this. The idea is our feelings and behavior today are influenced by experiences in our early childhood and how we feel about them. It's called transactional analysis. Really, it's basically saying that we go through different ego states at any one time, and it changes every 6 seconds, basically, can be that quickly, that you can be in your parent ego state, your adult ego state, or your child ego states, and the interactions between you and people come up that way. So conceptually, it actually begins with this idea that information is stored in the brain simply because this information is stored on tapes that can't be erased or easily edit it. At any one time, we are in one of these different ego states. And by the way, right now, every one of you, and I'll get to an explanation of it later, you're in what's called the adaptive child state. And I'll explain that later, but you're all in an ego state right now. You might switch really quickly to another ego state, like this bunch of crap, I wasted my time, why am I here? You might go to your rebellious child state. So we are in different ego states at any one time. And it happens to, remember we talked about communication can be by words, tone, and body language. So your ego state can be reflected by your words, your tone, or your body language that you're in. So when you think about it this way, I want you to think about these different ego states: the parent, the adult, and the child. All right. Now, the parent ego state is the part of us that acts like the real life parent, scolding, punishing, controlling, judging, nurturing, defending, and so on. It houses rules and regulations that guide ourselves as we go through life, but it's usually programmed largely when we were young and how we react to events swiftly and automatically without thinking about it. This can be very useful, or it can create a problem for us. The favorite words of the parent ego state is "you should." How many times you know what you should do? You should clean your room. You should do your homework. You should do this. You should do. We tell people you should. And that is from your parent in you, because your parents told you sometimes in your early childhood you should. The parent ego state is usually done between the ages of 0 and 6 years of age, where we start to figure out, based on how our parents manipulate us sometimes, or how our parents communicate with us, and how we then tend to communicate with other people based on that. Critical parent messages from the critical parent, there's two types of parent: critical parent and nurturing parent. And go back to the slide, the judgmental, prejudicial statements of right or wrong, statements of what's acceptable and not acceptable, those are critical parent messages. So, okay, so they can be like, respect your elders, don't talk to strangers, don't ask so many questions, speak only when spoken to, don't talk about money. These are examples of critical parent messages that might have influenced you early in life that are now maybe with you as you go through life later on. Now, when we get to the last couple of slides, we'll document and kind of analyze your scores from the tests that you took to see whether your natural style is more critical or more nurturing. But these are the critical parent messages. So again, that parent state is how we behave, feel, and think in response to unconscious mimicking of how our parents treated us. So again, there's the parent is the two spots. I want you to remember that. Two types of parent ego state: critical parent or nurturing parent. For example, a person might shout at someone out of frustration because they learned from influential figures in childhood the lesson that they can get what they want that way. Again, this information from your brain between 0 and 5 or 6 years of age, where we became either more of a critical type of person or a nurturing type of person. Okay. All right. So nurturing parent messages are warm, supportive, they're comforting, they're kind of loving. It's okay, mommy will make it better. I know you did the best you can. That's all I care about. You get one for trying. That parent ego state in the form of messages or statements on what to do, what to say, or how to act in either a positive or a negative manner. Now, then we have the logical part of us, the ego state that we get switched to. The logical part of us is where we started learning about things in a logical manner. It's kind of like that computer processing information, where the computer processes information logically and makes predictions based on major events that they're absent of major emotions that could affect its operation. So that's the logical part of us, the Mr. Spock from Star Trek, if you will, the logical part of us. All right. So again, we could be from one ego state quickly to the other. Let me get in here. I got to go back to the slide. Sorry about that. There we go. All right. So that parent recording is, again, of something that happened to us between the first 5 to 6 years of our life. But if you think about it, around about 10 months of age, you began to process and separate yourself from your caregiver, use your mother, by crawling or walking or exploring. And if you think about it, as you start to crawl away from your mom and you go into the kitchen and you reach up on the stove and you touch it and you're hot, you realize logically I shouldn't do that. I'm going to burn myself if I do that. You don't even need your parent to tell you you shouldn't do that. We start to make sense of the world logically. And this new recording is that adult part of you. But unlike the parent and the child, this tape recording is still going. We're still learning of what we consider to be logical or illogical. Okay. All right. Keep going the wrong way. Sorry. It also acts, I want you to understand that the adult in us acts as kind of the referee between the demands of the parent and the statements we get from children. All right. So again, don't talk about money might be a logic, what you heard from your parents, but logically, if you're in sales, you have to talk about money. So you see how it acts as the referee between what you might have learned from your parents, but what you have to do now later in life. And at the same, oh boy, it's sliding on me. I'm sorry about that. I got to fix this a little bit. All right. So, all right, then we have what's called the child in us. And the child is made up of three different parts: the rebellious child, the adaptive child, and the natural child. For example, those of you that I love cracking jokes or saying something in fun, or if you still like to go out and you make snow angels in the snow, or you still like jumping in the leaves, or I still like roller coasters. That's the natural child that still comes out in me. All right. Then I have the rebellious child, which is that part of us where we learn to, that maybe temper tantrum can get us what I want. Early in life, these type of people learn to get what they want through that type of rebellious behavior. And then the natural child is that fun-loving, creative. And then the adaptive child, whoops, this thing keeps going back on me. I'm so sorry. The adaptive child is that part of us that wants to please others, continually seeks approval and acceptance, someone that does, whatever the teacher says. I don't want to rock the boat. Someone will give in that would rather argue. And you might go from, remember, you might go from these different states where you started talking to somebody in a critical parent, then you went to nurturing, then you went to logical adult, then you went to rebellious child. We switch rapidly in these different ego states based on the situation that we're in. And again, there's another one called the little professor. The little professor is that aspect of us that maintains a balance between the natural child and adaptive child. The little professor, and that's important in the scores as you took the test, because they'll say LP if you rated yourself. And again, why I didn't tell you what NP, CP, A, what I tell you, I didn't want you to be skewed in your answers going up there. That's why I kind of separated that to begin with. But again, the adaptive child is that part of us that wants to please other people. The adaptive child part of us is really what hurts sometimes us from being, how would I put it, good in sales, because you don't want to try a new technique that I give you, because you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to upset somebody. But that little professor is probably the most intriguing part of us. The best way to explain that is the little professor is us that came up with manipulative or sneaky ways of doing something different. It's not always bad, but the little professor of us is very good at figuring out what people want. It's that the story I use is little Johnny. He's 5 years of age and goes up to mommy and says, "Mommy, can I have a cookie?" And mom says, "No, it's 4:30. You see, I'm making dinner. Why don't you go and watch cartoons, and I'll call you when dinner's ready." Next night, 5 o'clock, same thing. Mommy, can I have a cookie? Johnny, you see, I'm making dinner. Dinner's almost ready. No, I'm not going to give you a cookie. Go in the other room. Third night, again, mommy, can I have a cookie? Now she gets a little frustrated with him. The critical parent comes, "No, Johnny, I told you." Gives him a swat on the butt. "Go in the other room. I'll call you when dinner's ready." What does he do the fourth night? Daddy, can I have a cookie? So the little professor in us figures out manipulative ways to get what we want. And it's still that coming from that child ego state in us. And again, what does this have to do with child development? And I've rapidly gone through a lot of these slides because I want to get to the point where I can analyze your scores if some of you had it. But if you think about it, 70% of your selling should come from nurturing parent, and only 30% should come from the logical adult. And the little kid in you should stay in the car. In sales, really, the rebellious or adaptive or natural child should not be a part of our communications with somebody, with a prospect or a client. It should become from nurturing parent, logical adult, and the little kid, and you should stay in the car. And then I add the joke always, obviously with the windows cracked. Okay. So if I want you to think about it this way, you're in ego states here, and you should be 70% nurturing parent, 30% logical adult. Think about the customer. They have ego states too. And the way it works is the child likes to buy. We all like to buy. I don't like to shop, but I sure like going to Bass Pro Shop and buy fishing equipment. All right. But the parent in me says, yeah, you can, grants permission, but the logical adult says, yes, there's money in the account. Go ahead and write a check. So when you're thinking about talking to your prospects, they like to buy your product or service. We talked about 4 reasons why people buy anything: gain pleasure, avoid pain. That's the pleasure part. I like buying something. That's the fun part. But you got to talk to the parent in them to get permission for them to buy the product or service. And it's logical whether they can afford your product or service. So when we start talking about how to communicate with somebody, your nurturing parent can talk to the child that likes to buy. Your nurturing parent can talk to the adaptive child. Your logical adult can talk to the parent that grants permission. Your logical adult can talk to their logical adult. But your little kid can't talk to anybody. And we call that a cross transaction. A cross transaction is typically caused when the partners address ego states other than what the other partner is in. All right. So it's going to look like this. A cross transaction would be maybe your logical adult's talking to their logical adult, but your child is talking to their parent. Your rebellious child is, why wouldn't you want to do this? This seems logical. Why wouldn't you? And the parent, the nurturing parent, didn't get involved in this relationship. So that's can be what we call a cross transaction. What's going to happen is you're going to see this now that you might not watch and recognize it in your own, you doing it, but you'll probably watch other people's transactions now, where you see 2 people having a communication and you'll see one person in one ego state and they're not addressing the ego state the other person's in. But again, to be safe, 70% nurturing parent, 30% logical adult. And again, the softening statements that I've taught you and the strokes help you say nurturing things. So I want you to think about the softening statements combined reverse is the nurturing parent and the logical adult. Good question. That's an interesting question. That makes sense. See, that's all nurturing. And logically, why is that important to you? Nurturing, that's an interesting question. Logically, and why is that important? Why did you ask me that? So that's what I was trying to teach you guys in these stroke, repeat, reverse for clarity. Stroke is the nurturing parent. Repeat is the logical adult. And then you get more information logically in return from this client. All right. So again, see how the nurturing parent is the softening statement and the reverse is the logical adult. All right. So let's take a look at your scores. All right. And then I'll leave time for people. If somebody's bold enough, what usually happens in these is people call me and say, hey, here's my score, Wayne, or here's what I think I am. And we talk about whether that's good or bad. And most of the time it's not a problem, but all right. Now, so when you start looking at your scores, you should have had scores in CP, which is critical parent, NP, nurturing parent, A, logical adult, CP, natural child, LP, little professor, and AC, adaptive child. Those is where you should have got scores. And I want you, when you look at the LP, the little professor, that's also the rebellious child. So it's one and the same when we look at the scores you took on the test. So there's no right or wrong answers or results in the grid. It's just a reflection of some of the components of your personality and what's natural to you or not natural to you. The numeric value, so this is important when you score. The numeric values for the 2 components of the parent, the nurturing parent and the critical parent, or the 3 components of the child states, logical or rebellious, natural, and little professor, those are only significant in relations to each other. For example, if your critical parent is 3 or more higher points than your nurturing parent, let's say you had 15 on nurturing and 18 on critical parent, if you scored that, then that is what's the stronger influence on your behavior, is your more style is to be more critical. Okay. So does that make sense? And if you're looking at your child scores, you can sit there and say your adaptive score is 3 or more higher than the other one. That's your most dominant style, is to be more of an adapted, just go with the flow. So when I'm working with some people and they're asking me to use either DISC or Divine or some of these assessment tests in hiring somebody, I'll also have them take this test. And the reason I'll have them take this test is if I find somebody with really, really high adaptive child scores, I mean, really high adaptive scores, 5, 6 more than any of the others, what I find is those people struggle with some of our training. And what I mean by that is because they go with the flow, they don't want to rock the boat, they don't take some of the trainings we give them and then implement them and try them because they're afraid the client won't like it. They're afraid they're upset the client. So what they'd, for example, if I teach somebody, when somebody says, so what do you charge for your product or service? You know, it's a great question, probably a lot more than you were expecting. Why what we're expecting? Somebody with high adaptive child scores will struggle with that new technique. And so I will kind of talk to manager. By the way, those of you high people, you may not disqualify somebody legally based on scores they take in an assessment. You can't sit there and say to somebody, well, you scored this. And what it can do is help you ask more questions for that person. So you could come back and say, hey, according to the test, tell me a time when you weren't able to implement a training technique that somebody tried to teach you. You can use the assessments to help you in an interview process, but legally you can't say to somebody, oh, I didn't hire you because you didn't score high on this test or not. So again, but I will learn that as I'm training somebody, I might have a conversation with somebody in training and say, hey, the company's hired you, but I noticed something in your scores. We're going to have to work a little bit on some of these techniques I'm going to teach you. Instead of just teaching you and assume you're going to do it, your scores indicate that maybe you might struggle with some new techniques. Does that make sense? Would that be something we should have a conversation about? So that's one of the reasons you want to take the test, to see how people score in these kind of things differently. Okay. So now of the treats, again, of the child scores, the component with the outstanding score, and this, don't ask me why, I don't know how they scored this, was with the one that is either relatively higher or lower by 3 or more indicates the prominence of influence. So when you look at your child scores, the one is either 3 or more higher or lower is your dominant style. Of the adult scores that you get could range from 0 to 36, with the median being 18. Scores above 27 are considered very high in the adult. Scores below 9 are considered very low. So when you look at the characteristics of a critical parent, they tend to be more critical and judgmental of others. They set really firm standards of performance or behavior and expect others to abide by them. Often people view them as bossy or know-it-alls. They are opinionated and quick to let others know of their opinions. When they think someone is wrong, they say so. I had one client, Bob was his name. I won't tell you the last name, but Bob was one of these guys that if I said, hey, it's partly cloudy out there right now, he'd say, no, it's mostly sunny. The sky's blue. Well, that's only during the day. He would always say things like that. He was a right fighter. He always had to fight for rightness and be the upper hand, but he was critical of everything. I mean, his style was so much so that as a manager, most of his salespeople knew not to look for encouragement from him, that he looked at everything in a negative light. Okay. So there are some people like that, that's critical parent, that's critical scores. Again, for those of you that have already jumped ahead of me and you're looking at your score, very few times have I really found too many people that I train that say to me, oh yeah, my critical parent is 4, 5, 6 higher than my nurturing. Most of you, it's nurturing parent. And that's good. But just remember, sometimes you might be dealing with a prospect who's always negative, the Eeyores of the world. The sky's falling, everything's no good. And just realize that's just a natural style to them. That's just their style. They're not doing it to you. And that's what happens sometimes when we're dealing with a prospect and they're always negative. You know, you salespeople are all alike, that. And we take it too personal instead of realizing, oh, that's just the ego state they're in at this point. Boy, I need to stay in my nurturing parent to combat that. If I go to my critical parent, you know, why would you say that? That's stupid for you to say something like that. Now you got two rebellious kids talking to each other, and that's not a good communication. Critical parent behavior is appropriate in certain situations. It does not belong in sales arena, though. Like most people, prospective clients don't like to be told what to do. I mean, think about it. When you say, you know what you should do? Let me show you what you should do. When you tell somebody what they should do, their natural instinct is go back to their childhood when their parents told them what they should do. And they're usually rebellious, and they go into that. You made them go into the rebellious state. So often, even though they seem to accept what you say, they'll find a way to sabotage you or the results. So be careful about coming out critical parent too often. There are certain situations in management where maybe a little bit of critical parent is necessary. So I've had a lot of people fight me on this one when I'm talking about 70% nurturing parent, 30% logical adult. They'll come back. So, well, sometimes in management, you have to be, and I will give you that. Sometimes you have to be a little bit critical of somebody's behavior, but make sure you finish it with what might be considered nurturing behavior. Again, high nurturing parent scores. Nurturing parent is this. They're described as caring and helpful. They readily offer comfort and support to somebody. They offer help. They offer solutions to somebody experiencing a problem. They look out for the welfare of others. They help others discover a better way. And now, those of you that have really high nurturing parent scores, and I'm talking more than 3 or more, I'm talking 5, 6, 7 more, and it's the most dominant that you're really nurturing. Here's something that could be an issue for those type of people. They are so willing to be helpful that sometimes they give away the store and they're too willing to discount on your price or services. Because again, you think that this person's problem that you can't control somebody else's pocketbook. But if somebody's, oh man, I can't afford that, that's really too expensive. The nurturing parent in you comes out and says, well, maybe there's something we could do. Maybe we could do this. And you start being too nurturing. So again, there's good and bad. You don't want to be not nurturing, but you don't want to be too much, because that might be the type of person who gives the store away. And again, that behavior is well suited for others, but just be careful that interaction with prospective clients will always require some type of nurturing parent scripts that you use. Your adult scores. Let's look at this one. Again, the scores come 0 to 36. Median is the middle, if you will. All right. Again, this behavior is necessary at about 30% of any of our communications with somebody. But somebody can be too highly critical. Again, they might be too detailed. The high C in the DISC profile, compliant, follow rules, detail oriented. And you might argue with somebody logically, all right? High scores of more than 26. Scores in the adult of more than 26 is considered high. They're good at gathering data, analyzing problem. They tend to stay calm and objective because they're looking at it logically. They seek and find logical explanations for situations, but they're more likely to get mirrored in the details and sometimes miss the big picture. They're often more comfortable discussing the process rather than the results. But again, they argue logically, not emotionally. I'm more of the type of person where, yeah, I have high adult logic scores because I was in debate in high school. I understand that I might argue with my wife logically, but she is going to argue more emotionally. And I have to remember that logic isn't the way she processes information. And it's fine because it's more of an emotional conversation that I need to have with her. The low adult scores, again, lower than 10, characteristics of people with relatively low score, they again argue emotionally, not logically. So understanding whether that's an important part of the person you're talking to, or if it's one that you do, where you are talking to somebody who's a C, you're not using enough logic with that type of person. High natural child scores. They're often described as uninhibited or impulsive. They're often spontaneous. They like to have fun. They can be self-centered and indulgent. They enjoy a good practical joke when played on others, but not on them. Okay. The problem with the high natural in sales is there's a type of salesperson who thinks, oh, I'm the life of the party. People like me. I'm the funniest guy in the room. People buy because of this. I think people buy in spite of it, not because of it. The high natural child can say something that can be offensive to somebody. They thought it was a good joke, but didn't. So just be careful about if your high natural child comes across too often in the sales arena. While having fun, being silly, and playing jokes are a natural part of life, it's this type of behavior is rather not appropriate all the time in a business setting. So be careful about that. The high little professor, again, they have a strong intuitive sense. Now, again, look at your scores. Those of you that scored 3 or more higher than the other child scores, LP, there's some good and bad to that. So let's explain that a little bit more. They have a high, strong intuitive sense. They're creative. They can usually figure out how to get their way, sometimes using unconventional means. They're very creative, though, and they often know and are thought that they can talk anybody into anything. But sometimes they come across as or perceived as manipulative or sneaky. So the little professor scores, there's nothing wrong with having good instincts or trusting your intuition, but you must keep this in check with any behavior that others might consider manipulative, sneaky, or unethical. There's a fine line between what's unconventional and what's unethical. In a business setting, it's important not to cross the line or even appear to be close. Example, the little professor might say to customer, hey, don't tell my boss I did this, but I'm going to discount this 10%. Now, that might sound like you're offering a way to get to a sale. What the person might be thinking, who's very heavy in logic, might be thinking, oh, okay, so you're willing to take advantage of your boss and cut corners for your boss. What are you going to do to me? Or I had a great example. I had a builder came up to me and he said, hey, Wayne, I got to tell you about this story I had last week. And he went into the describe that we had this client that when we designed the kitchen and we built the island, the building inspector didn't improve the island in the kitchen because it was too close to where the dishwater opened up on the other counter side. And if we moved it, then it would be too close, even though being compliant, by moving a few more inches away, it'd be too close to the pantry door and where the guy wanted to put a bar stool. And it just, so what I said to him is, why don't we do this? Why don't we put the island up on casters? We'll put a bead of trim molding around the bottom so you can't see it. We'll move it a couple inches out of the way. When the inspector comes back, that'll way it'll pass inspection. And then you can slide it back to where you want it. Now, while that builder I talked to felt that the little professor he thought it was a good way to solve a solution, he ended up having some struggle with the client because what do you think the client thought? Where else did we cut corners and didn't meet code? Where else am I going to get in trouble? So that's what I mean by that little professor. You have to, it can be considered as very creative to a solution, but it also could come across as manipulative or unethical. So be careful about your scores in a little professor. And again, the high adaptive child scores, they continue to seek approval from others. They avoid confrontation. They avoid rocking the boat. They tend to accept what others say on face value. And sometimes they're not open to new sales techniques. So hopefully this is kind of give you a better example of looking at your scores. Again, most people want to be liked and accepted, but for the most part, it's a healthy desire. However, when the desire becomes a need, it's a need to be approved. It's a need. It can prevent you from carrying out some business activities, especially those that you think might make somebody else uncomfortable. So again, hopefully, if you think about your scores, they're right along the middle road and you don't have one that is more dominant than another by too many higher scores. So what I'd like to do now is if somebody's got questions about your scores or somebody else, I'd like to open it up to everybody as far as questions you have. Wayne, this is my score. What about this? Mark, you have any comments first?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to tell you my scores and tell you what I have. I mean, I'm kind of surprised by them a little bit, I guess, because um, usually they are. But I'm equal on my critical parent and my nurturing parent at 16 each, and
Okay.
then my adult is at 23.
Okay, so that's not 27. That's not real high adult. So
Yeah,
do you believe that you tend to be more logical than you do nurturing parent?
yeah, that's what I guess I thought of myself like in my life. I think I'm more of a nurturing parent, like to my actual kids, but I realize probably to my clients, I'm less of a nurturing parent and more logical. So, you know,
Okay, again, logic is okay. It's when
yeah,
it's when it's worded in the form of you should. Do you ever find
yeah.
yourself telling a client what they should do?
I try not to, but I mean, because that's one of the things that I've noticed is I don't like it when I've had employees that'll say, you know what you should do, and then they say something like that. That's something I've always been cognizant of, and I've always tried to avoid. So because I've always been able to see that like clients' eyes roll back and they don't want to hear that, right? So that part. But then I guess the other part that like I look at, you know, my other numbers, I'm like 21, 14, and 19. So if I'm reading that right, my dominant would be my little professor.
Correct.
Okay, because it's unusually
Because that's
low.
more dominant than the other two
Yeah.
in the child scores.
Yeah, because it's low, not because it's high. But
Correct.
yeah,
So that
okay.
means that you are creative,
Hmm.
okay, that you can come up with solutions. It just could it come across as sneaky, manipulative, or unethical ever? And
Yeah.
again, all these things are make you aware of situations and ego states that you're in at any one time, so that you can either manipulate's the wrong word, influence your own behavior is what I'm
Yeah.
thinking about. As long as you, as I look at your scores, one thing that I would suggest is probably try and be more nurturing. More nurture. I mean, because 16 critical parent being even, it means you're right walking the line. I'd rather see your scores at least score as more of a nurturing. And that's why we hope that you start doing more of the stroke, repeat, reverse, because that's the best way. That's a great question. Glad you brought that up. For example, if somebody came to you and said, hey, I think we ought to do it this way, and it's absolutely the wrong way, it's terrible, the critical parent in you would criticize that statement. Oh, you don't want to do that. Oh, that would be a dumb mistake. Where the nurturing parent would say, interesting, you would say that any issues you would see with doing it that way. And the bird, why? What do you mean? Well, suppose I said it could create this problem, this problem. Would that be a conversation you'd like to have? See how nurturing that is, as opposed to immediately, you know, putting the hammer down. That was a dumb thing to say. I can't believe you'd want to do it that way, kind of situation. Um, I had when I bought a car a couple weeks ago. I bought a car 3-year lease, knowing that it's a 3-year lease, 3-year unlimited warranty on the car, and that when I told him what kind of vehicle I first wanted, the salesman goes, "Oh, you don't want to buy that." And I go, "Yeah, why? I mean, I've done the research. I like that vehicle." "No, you don't want to do that. It doesn't come across as." Yeah, I did the checking on that. That vehicle doesn't have how did he word it? A good service record. And I said, "Well, what am I worried about? I mean, if it's under warranty for 3 years, even if it does have an issue, it's covered. I don't have any out of pocket. Why wouldn't want to buy it? Nah, you just don't want to buy that one." Now, is he selling for his reasons or mine? So I think maybe he didn't have as much. I'm thinking, well, maybe he's not making as much commission off of that vehicle. Maybe that's why he's trying to push me in a direction using his critical parent instead of saying, "Hey, that's interesting. If an independent magazine said that that wasn't as a reliable vehicle, would that be of interest, or would you care about that?" And if I said no, then we could have moved right on. But because he put me in that situation where he criticized what the research I already done, I was like, okay, now we're done. And I moved on to another salesperson. So that's what I mean by being careful. Any other comments on yours? And I'll move on to anybody else.
No,
Otherwise,
I think
I
that's
say your
good.
scores are pretty good. I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay.
So 16 across the board in the critical nurturing,
Yep.
23
23.
for adult, and
Yep.
then the highest was a little professor.
Yep. Yeah, because I went 21, 14, and 19. So
Okay, good. All right. Who else has got some scores they want to share with us and ask me about them? And I've done this for years, so I'm used to analyzing people's scores. Rob, anything from yours? Any comments? You're muted. All right, so let me put it this way: if anybody's afraid to share it with me, what do you see that you deal with prospects? At what ego state typically are most prospects in? Any thoughts from people on that? What the prospects you deal with? What ego state are they generally spending the most amount of time in? Anybody? Well, remember the slide about the child likes to buy, the parent grants permission, and the logical adult writes the check. So what happens is at the beginning, they're typically in their child state because they like to buy, they like the process of going through. Then when it really comes down to the decision step, now they're moving into their parent where they're starting to think about this transaction. And then logically is the last step in the close. In the close, it's when they're thinking about logically, can I afford this? Logically, does this make sense? So remember the slide I said about your nurturing parent can talk to any one of their ego states. Your adult can talk to their adult, but your little kid can't talk to any of them. Okay. Just keep that in mind. What I tend to find though, when I'm doing training is the salespeople who are struggling selling a commodity, a product where the client thinks, hey, I can get the exact same thing somewhere else. That's a commodity to me. I can get the exact same product somewhere else cheaper. The thought process is this. Yes, that might be true. But if milk, I saw milk the other day at the grocery stores going for a gallon for $3, but milk going at the convenience store, okay, it's like $4. Why would anybody buy milk at the convenience store when they can get it for $3? If people buy on price, wouldn't everybody buy it at the grocery store? No, some people buy a $4 gallon of milk because they don't want to take the time to walk all the way to the back of the store. They don't want to, there's other reasons for that. And somebody who's got really high critical parent scores will criticize somebody on that type of a decision because they'll take their critical parent and then they mask it under logical adult. And they're sit there say things like, well, you get what you pay for, right? Or do you think you'd get for that price? When somebody says somebody like, hey, I talked to the competitor is willing to give it to me for this price. Well, sure. Yeah. Yeah, of course, because they're, whatever critical, they don't score as high as we do with the Better Business Bureau or whatever like that. The critical parent salespeople gets into an argument with a client because they think that the logic that they have in their own mind is going to influence that person. It doesn't work that way. If you're a rebellious child and a critical parent, your client isn't going to buy from you. And I know that's so obvious, but the idea of doing this training, this ego state training, is when you leave here, the next time you have an interaction with somebody, it might prevent you from just every once in a while that one sentence came out that shouldn't have come out. That negative thing. All of a sudden you'll think, uh-oh, that's negative, that's critical parent. Uh-oh, that's rebellious child. Uh-oh. And you'll stop moving into one of these ego states. Okay. Now, if any of you are training, teaching anybody else, we learn best in our adaptive child state. The adaptive child state is where we learn best. So creating a great environment for somebody to be in that is the best thing for you to do to make sure that somebody can learn from you if they're in their adaptive child state. So it's kind of what I try to do with these things is put you in that adaptive child state so you learn best from there. And I try and stay out of my critical parent state if I can. Okay. Comments, questions? Anybody else want to jump in? Please do to help play full out. All right. Three things I need from you guys, and I'll let you go. What surprised you the most about your own scores? What surprised you most about your own score? Give me three responses. I need three different people to participate. Tell me that. Unmute yourselves and just tell me. What do you think? What surprised you the most about your own score? Go ahead, Mark.
I think the little professor part description it's accurate, but like it feels, you know, like I think I came across like I think the good parts in there I recognize, like being able to find creative solutions and some of those things like that, and maybe being able to change people's minds, but coming across as manipulative is something that I hadn't thought about that I need to change and kind of focus on making sure that I'm not crossing that line. So
And I doubt if you really ever do, as long as you're doing the stroke, repeat, reverse.
yeah.
You can present your ideas or solutions to people, but make sure you do it in the stroke, repeat and reverse. Suppose I said we might want to try it this way. If I said that, would that be something you'd be interested in doing? people accept it that way better than you just telling them. And remember the line, and some of you have been with their training, you've heard me say this. If you're telling, you're not selling. If you have to tell somebody and try and, because most people think sales is about convincing somebody to buy your product or service. And that's what makes it difficult for all of us, why many of us didn't want to get into sales. We don't want to have to convince somebody. And that's what people think. If I tell somebody, I'll convince them with my benefits and features. But if you do it in a nurturing way, it's kind of like if your parents said, yeah, hey, suppose I said it's getting late, maybe you might want to think about doing your homework, so you don't have to get up in the morning before the school bus comes. Okay, yeah, mom. If I said, hey, it's getting late, do your homework. No, wait, I'll do it in the morning. See, right away, we get into that rebellious fight because critical parent invoked a reaction that is rebellious child. So even taking it to your level, if we tell somebody about your product or service, they sometimes are going to argue with your data. We don't argue with our own, we'll argue with theirs. Rob, anything that surprised you about this training? Even if it wasn't your scores, anything that, and you have to unmute yourself too.
Yeah, I didn't take the test. I did not have a chance to take the test.
But see, now what's going to happen is your answers will be skewed because now you know why I'm asking them.
Well, no,
Be
not
careful.
necessarily. I'll take it later when I've already forgotten, until
Okay.
Before I review, what's going on. I have an idea of where I probably am.
Okay.
So,
and as it doesn't relate to you, any part of the training that surprised you or that you were about, even whether it relates to customers or anything like that, any other, or boy, I didn't know that, or that was interesting. Are there any interesting?
well, this is not the first time I've heard it. You know that. I think your presentation's awesome. I'm not just stroking you, but I'm serious. I think it was a great presentation. What I find interesting is there were some customers along the way that, boy, I really didn't get along with them at all. And it probably was because they were a critical parent and I was more of a rebellious child.
There you go.
So,
yeah, they started it.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it just, to me, as going through this training starting in '92, I've always thought it interesting how modern psychology applies into sales. One of the quotes that people have heard is, sales is a Broadway play put on by a psychiatrist, because you have to psychoanalyze who this person is. It's a 7-act play or whatever. So, but you're the director of this play. You are controlling how this goes. I appreciate you contributing. Val, anything that surprised you about this training?
Just that I wish I would have read the instructions and done it in time. I'm sorry.
That's why I said it last week. I was hoping people have time to do it, but try it again. At least try
Okay.
it. And then again, those of you who haven't yet, take it and then call me and we'll have a one-on-one about what your scores mean. All of you. Okay. So call me and say, hey, Wayne, I took the test. Here's my scores. But again, when you answer it now, even though you know some of the things, you're going to read and say, oh, I know what they're asking. They're seeing if I'm, one of the questions might be something like, I tend to continue conversation with people until I win. Or if somebody is wrong, I'm quick to point it out and tell them that. Well, those scores will add up into the critical parent score. So you might not answer it that way now and give yourself as high of a numeric value.
Well, that doesn't do you much good if you're just going to try and manipulate it so that it comes out the way you want it. Realistic.
It's human nature for us. If we know the reason why it's asking a question, we try and do it that differently that way. So right. Just try and answer it as best you can, honestly. Kendra or Colleen, anything from you guys that surprised you about it, or how it relates to what you guys do at all?
Mine was no surprise at all.
Okay.
Nurturing parent, I scored 24. And everything else was in a range from 13 to 17.
All right, good. Very neutral on the way. Great. All right.
I was a 24 parent. read through the questions, I was thinking personally versus professionally, how differently I might interpret the question. So
Yeah.
I don't know how that plays into it.
All right, that's good comment. So I'll address that. Many people say, well, how I take tests and how I am at work is different than how I might be at home. Well, the way we answer that typically is, well, one of them is your natural style and the other one you're acting at. So you have to decide, are you more what you really are at home, or are you just playing at work, or vice versa? So when you think about your nurturing parent scores, most people come across as more nurturing than they do logic or critical parent. Just be careful if they're too high. That do you ever, give away the store, discount immediately right away? Are you sometimes too nurturing, or can you go back to your logical? Again, if you're too nurturing, don't go to critical parent. Don't go more to the logical adult part of you. So, all right. All right, I'll let you guys go. Those of you that are watching this video, and if you haven't taken the test, just email me at Wayne at 3dpro.services. I'll send you the link to take this over again. If there's anybody that you want to take it, any friends or coworkers or other people that aren't on our program, feel free to send it out to them. It's public knowledge, that test, so send them the link and let them take it, and then try and walk them through it if there's any employees that aren't on this that you'd like them to take the test. All right. I appreciate you guys very much. I'll post this on our YouTube channel shortly after it converts. Call me if you have any questions on your own scores.
One quick comment for you.
Go ahead.
On our company, for our emails, I think you eliminated me for being the email instead of Carolyn, and Carolyn is still on our email, so I didn't get the emails.
Oh, okay. I apologize.
No, no worries. If you can just kind of change the name to put me on it and take Carolyn off.
All right. All right. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.